Hey everybody, and welcome back to episode 5 of Vertical Blocks, where today we're really excited to be joined by Beethoven X. We've also got Sam, head of BD here at Fantom, and we've got Daniel and Souvlaki. So thanks for joining us, guys.
Hey guys, real pleasure to be here. So honored, actually. Thanks for making time for us.
Definitely.
Hey guys, thanks for having us.
So I think a good place to start, guys, would be for anybody who may be, first-time listener who's coming across Beets for the first time. If you could give us just a high-level overview of how you would describe yourselves, your product, your service, and then a little bit of insight into what it is each of you do on the team. I think that would be a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. So Beethoven X is a kind of official balancer-friendly fork is the model. And so for those of you guys who are unfamiliar with Balancer as a protocol, specifically Balancer V2, like the origin story of Balancer protocol was the weighted pool. So Fernando, who is the kind of founder or one of the founders, had this idea that he wanted to actually provide liquidity in more than two assets. So Uniswap V2, as we all know, is essentially like usually you have ETH and then something else like USDC. But at that point, he wanted to actually kind of come to a place where he actually could have 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, or up to 8 assets into a single liquidity pool, providing different ratios of each asset and essentially having it rebalanced. So he wanted to participate in on-chain liquidity providing, but also at the same time be able to kind of maintain desired asset ratio exposure. And that was actually the origin story of what Balancer Protocol is. So that's actually where they got a lot of their initial traction, and where we came in, or essentially the story as it kind of comes to us, is that we launched on Fantom with Balancer V2, which is kind of the second iteration of the Balancer Protocol, which kind of takes this idea and takes the idea of liquidity provision and really they tried to abstract a lot of the complexity away. And to kind of maybe explain it a little bit simpler is that the idea of Balancer V2 is that it can be a lot of what everything else is, essentially. So if you think about Curve is a stable swap where you have like priced assets like USDC and USDT, and they can be in one pool and you can trade them in large volume with little slippage. Uniswap V2 is the 50-50. And then you have a bunch of these maybe futuristic types of liquidity provisions that are coming. But Balancer V2 tries to essentially create an abstraction layer that says that if we provide what is the vault and allows us for a very secure mechanism for liquidity provision, we can essentially build any type of liquidity pool on top of it. And that is what we launched on Fantom just about a year ago. Actually, it's coming up on a year now. It's been a really amazing ride, really incredible opportunity, and we're so excited to still be here and still get to keep kind of pushing that kind of story forward, because we think that the protocol in itself has so much future potential and still is underserved in the market today. Hopefully that made some sense.
That's really cool. One of the points that I really like about Beets is that ability to have multi assets in the one pool getting yields. I remember somebody came to me and they're like, "Hey, where's like a good index of Fantom assets that we can kind of just buy into?" And I was like, well, Beets, like they have these great pools. You can get like up to 4 or 5 assets in the one pool and get yield on it and get like different exposure to different tokens. So definitely innovative and really cool to see.
Yeah, exactly. The kind of the sales pitch or the value prop is, you can think of it as an ETF, where you have a basket of assets, and you have different ratios, desired exposure ratios. And the really cool thing the decentralized finance and this kind of construct allows is that instead of you paying somebody to do it for you, it's actually you're being paid for it to be done. And I think that that's one of the really innovative kind of layers that we really get to play with out here.
Yeah, it's like a reverse management fee.
Exactly. It's yeah, absolutely.
So I guess it would be safe to say that the two primary participants in your protocol are those who are providing liquidity and therefore having this kind of self-balancing index fund, right? And then active traders, whether they're manually or programmatically doing this, rebalancing that pool essentially seeking out arbitrage opportunities, and that's how both of these parties are essentially benefiting from participating in the protocol.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that this is also where we maybe separate ourselves from a lot of the other DEXs on the network, is that it primarily, something like SpookySwap only allows for a 50-50 pool, whereas a weighted pool allows you to kind of essentially like create your pool and your ratios, set it and kind of forget it, and come back to it in a few years maybe, if that's your path.
A few years. That's patience. That's patience.
Right.
Well, I think what would also be interesting to hear is, and I know Souvlaki was having some connectivity issues earlier, so let's hope that that's working again. But just to understand a little bit about each of you guys' respective roles on the team, you know, how you split responsibilities, even just some more general stuff, like what's it look like working on a distributed team where it has this very different nature from working at a traditional company, right?
Hey, yeah, absolutely. I think COVID was kind of the introduction of working with this global team and engaging across the planet with various teams. I think most companies are just in general doing these low-cost center location deployments where you're engaging with people online all the time as opposed to in the office environment. And now this kind of just adds on to that experience. In terms of like my introduction to the team, I lead the financial reporting section of Beethoven. So like Dan's already explained, like this amazing tech stack that the protocol is built on top of it. But then we try and do additional value add for either FBeets holders or investors or traders, just to give them full transparency on everything that happens with the protocol. And I drive a lot of that process. So what does that look like? Well, we do monthly financial reporting. So every month in our tunnel, we ask about our financial results. We go through like the protocol's performance in terms of volumes, top performing liquidity pairs, so that if we wanted to look historically to put some assets away, we give more visibility to things like that. We are quite open in terms of profitability of pools, and so we do like this whole data reporting around it from a financial perspective. Then to add to that, we also then segue into lots of various different things with the community. One of the big pieces that we've just reached a key milestone on is DAO governance, and governance in general. I mean, that right now is a very it's being spoken about quite a lot. If you think in the wider environment, when you read things like Tornado Cash developer getting arrested, or the SEC trying to enforce its jurisdiction on Ethereum transactions. So like that kind of how that shapes and evolves over the next few years is going to be quite important to the industry as a whole. So I from the sort of core contributor side, I drive some of the governance, pushing forward to get to when we talk about a DAO, what does that actually mean? What does it look like? What does it feel like? We often hear protocols talk about, oh, we are a DAO, we run by the community, but no one actually knows what that means and what does that look like. And there's no template out there. So we're kind of just wading our way through it to figure out like what is the best fit for everyone, and full decentralization and the commitment to that. And then the last part that I get involved is some of the community things. So we do like in terms of, especially after it's been like a difficult 9 months this year in the industry with lots of various things that have moved the markets. So we then created spaces for our community to come in and almost unwind in a way that's non-judgmental and free through. So we do like every 2 weeks, we do a meditation session that is hosted by a breathing specialist. And we also do things like Tech Tuesday, we talk about technology, and we give the community a space to just be themselves.
Well, so one thing I was going to ask, and this actually reminds me of a post I came across by, I'm not sure if it's someone who's part of the Beethoven team, but I think it was Josie. I took a note of it, talking about the relevance of social bonding for crypto. And this person was sort of talking about these sorts of things you're describing that Beethoven is doing, and how to build a strong community. What does a strong community mean? How to get people to stick around. And this is something I've been giving some thought to as well. It's like, what exactly is, a sticky user to you? What is a strong community defined as, right? Because there could be somebody that's heavily involved in Discord, for example, but beyond that, they have very little involvement in the protocol itself, or vice versa, right? Where they could have large amounts of capital stake in the protocol, but have almost zero to no engagement. And even in things like governance, right? It's hard to find that balance. I'm curious how you think about things such as decentralization. Where do you draw the line between, are we putting to a vote changing this color font on the front page, or are we putting to a vote, how to redistribute incentives and realign? So just that's a few different things I'm asking at once. But they're all sort of connected. How do you think about these different things interplaying with each other?
I mean, that's a great question, right? And that's what everyone is trying to figure out, because let me try and break them up into the various components and start with one of the things that we are most proud of is the work that Josie is doing. Josie is part of the team. She is the work, the research she does, the paper she does off the back of it. We as a team are incredibly proud to have her part of us, right? And just going through that thread and that report comes off the back, we see some of the drafts before it, and we see all the amount of work, and we see some of the things Josie would tell us about, she'd have X amount of participants in a study, and it'd be that is mind-blowing that so many people are willing to engage on this type of thing. So it is a very important part of what she's doing is she's joining the connection between a want and a need. Because people, we talk about protocols, think about, a sticky community, sticky liquidity, or the equivalent of sticky liquidity. But ultimately, end users of any protocol, people do tend to want to gravitate towards a community. And if we move towards, if we look at society in general, right, we're moving out of the meeting up as often as what we would do in a pub or at the park or wherever it may be. We're moving to the social online engagement space, but that doesn't change the want to connect, the want to feel like you belong and to interact with like-minded people, right? So what we're trying to facilitate is, you can still meet that need with us. Naturally, you can't create a space that is 100% perfect for everyone, because everyone is different. We're all individuals and we respect that. But we're trying to cultivate through her work a space where everyone feels comfortable that they can come and just be themselves and have that freedom.
Souvlaki, maybe to just quickly introduce. So Josie is part of the team. She's one of our team members. Just to kind of circle back on that. That was beautiful, Souvlaki. Thank you, by the way. She's a classically trained social scientist, has a PhD. And what she was initially kind of tasked to do was to do a study on stickiness, exactly what you were saying, Juan. And this was prior to kind of the USD DPEG. And she kind of being a social scientist, watched from the sidelines as that kind of all unfolded. And then decided that actually, before taking on the stickiness study, that it seemed more appropriate to actually look into something that she calls sense making, which is when your world stops making sense, how do you kind of bridge that gap? How do you come to the new terms, or come to new terms of your new reality? And she had quite some heavy interviews with quite a lot of from beginner to really kind of seasoned DeFi experts on their experience with Terra, the fallout, and then the aftermath, and then how they were kind of processing this. And this is the piece of work that she's currently working on that we are hoping to get published in like scholarly journals, as well as then quite a lot of articles for us as well too. It's super interesting. It's super like important actually, and I think that it's something that gets missed a lot of. Is the emotion, and that we are people, and there's a lot of stuff that happens, and those impacts that they have on us, and usually we're kind of by ourselves, and we don't have an outlet to really kind of talk to and reason with, and just have the community to bounce that off of. And I think to kind of like produce this, to me at least, seems quite important.
Yeah, I mean, I think so much of that is connected to transparency and communication. So even and building strong community bonds. I mean, and again, when I say community bonds, I myself do not have a PhD in social sciences, but I wish I did. But I kind of look at it as a mix between like it feels that we're transitioning away from this kind of kumbaya, everybody holds hands and dances around the fireplace, and more towards like what I've started to think of as like a distinction between a mercenary user and a missionary user, and orienting more people towards missionary in the sense that, yes, there are financial incentives, but those financial incentives are aligned to the long-term prosperity of the tribe, if we want to start thinking about it that way. But to tie that back to the point about this sort of transparency and communication, one of the things that you released and that Souvlaki was talking about is what I saw as a QBR, quarterly business report, the first time I came across it. And I was really impressed with the amount of the kind of detailed granularity and really just honesty about the performance of the protocol over, is it monthly or is it quarterly? I'm not sure.
It's both.
Okay, so for everything. But I suppose, what since all this stuff is technically on chain, and we have products out there that users could kind of use to come to their conclusions, like DeFi Llama, Token Terminal, other things like that. What drove your desire to like spend so much time and energy into creating these concise and clear reports to get out to your users?
I think, well, you're right. All the data is on chain, right? And you often see in conversations where people go, "Oh, you need to do your own research," but what does that look like? That data is on chain, but can the average person take that data in, read it, and understand it? Can they decode what on-chain data looks like? So do they have the tools available to do their own research? And so that was one of the factors. The other factor is I come from a finance background. I worked in all my experience is finance. And for me, it was, I pick up a corporate report, financial statements, whether it's half yearly, annual report. I look at it and I can make it it has a look and feel. These reports are developed under certain standards, whether it's under US GAAP or whether it's international financial reporting standards. There's a framework which they are reported under that when you pick them up, there's a level of familiarity with it. So when you read it, you understand it. But we, in the industry in general, we're moving towards a space where we want to bring our, well, in quotation marks, retail investors and corporates into the space. But there's nothing to help them bridge that gap with what they typically expect to see, right? If you want a large investment bank to come in and invest in your protocol, they're going to want to see financial statements, and to tell them to go get that data on chain, right, isn't going to fly. I mean, I don't know of anyone that would actually do that. They're going to be like, well, no, you need to give it to us. And so then it was like, okay, well, it's trying to, I have experience in that area, so I can add value to the space. Like, I'm not a developer. I can't code, right? So, but the industry shouldn't be a space where if you can't dev, you can't add value, right? So I try to find another element that I can add value proactively using all my knowledge and experience. And then the last bit was, if you look around, for digital assets, there's no real accounting framework out there. but it will come at some point. And part of the view was like, well, if we start with this and we start with this journey, we can be on the forefront, that as those reporting frameworks get released, it would be the easiest for us to adapt and evolve with us, so that we can issue a world-class financial product in every aspect when it comes to the reporting.
Wow.
Does
I do love the reports. I've seen a few of them. I think it also just speaks of the quality that you guys like provide. It's funny because in crypto, a lot of those TradFi requirements, they're not, you don't have to do it. It's not really expected, but you guys do go that extra length to be like, no, this is required, and we want to be transparent with how we're performing. So I love reading them. Keep them coming.
Yeah, absolutely agree. And I mean, the story of Souvlaki is also quite, I think, really cool. So Souvlaki was just one of our very, very early community members, was not an original team member, was just highly present, huge contributor, and just never stopped helping. At some point, was kind of essentially joined the team full time, and has become one of the strongest leaders that we have. Is definitely a massive community presence still to today, and it's just an honor to be able to work with him as well.
I was
Dan, you're making me.
Sorry, go ahead, Sam. I think you were going to say something.
I was just going to crack a joke about the Souvlaki kebab. Blushing with the tomatoes, but then it didn't come.
Yeah. At the end, today, I only know Souvlaki as Souvlaki, and that's why we wrapped him in a pita in his avatar, because he'll always be Souvlaki to me.
Yeah. Embarrassingly enough, I actually didn't know what a Souvlaki was. I was like, what is that? I thought it was some sort of like exotic name. And they're like, dude, it's just like another kebab. I was like, oh, all right.
Typical crypto. But so I do actually want to talk about the avatars themselves and the sort of NFT culture you've got going on. But real quick, before we move on from the topic of community, there's just one thing I want to ask, because I saw this on Twitter yesterday and it cracked me up. It was somebody, I think, from FTX saying that everybody should adopt the crypto customer service model, which is that you just go on a Telegram and berate the moderators for them to make changes that you want, and then you threaten to go to Walmart instead if they're Amazon. And so that cracked me up a little bit. This sort of trying to strike that balance between taking community feedback and taking it in stride and implementing it, and knowing what to filter in, what to filter out, what to reject, what to take seriously. So I'm curious, how do you guys go about aggregating that sort of community feedback to understand what would be valuable product features, implementations in terms of how you communicate with your community, and how do you decide what is noise and what to reject?
Well, I guess we've actually made like significant strides on that front over the last, actually this week. We had the community formally adopt the governance framework, which creates a more formalized structure to put things like this through the process. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier in terms of when we say it's DAO and it's community owned, what does that actually mean? And if we look at Beethoven, the protocol, and the actual product, right, it's for like the example you mentioned was change the font size. Well, no, like the importance of frameworks like that is to give the community the option to delegate that responsibility to someone else to carry it on. So they still have overarching authority over everything, but to put things up like, hey, should we do a new cover page for the website, and I'm going to put in quotation marks, smaller cosmetic changes like that. There's no you don't want to get lost in governance. You don't want to get lost in like the bureaucracy of everything, because they're not actually going to do anything. But an appropriate framework allows a certain sections to have delegated authority to go and work within a mandate. Then what you only need to then put through like an official governance vote is key strategic things like, excuse me, like when we first deployed on the network, the protocol fee that would be applied. When we're talking about using a significant portion of treasury assets to enter certain initiatives, like those are important things that governance should then be centered around. So we're focusing that energy on what right now looks and feels like the right things. But you want to, we work in a, not necessarily a space, like we are in a day and age where everyone wants their voice to be heard. They want to feel like they aren't just another number, not another customer. They aren't another, in like a traditional corporate environment, not just another dollar in the till, right? They want to feel like they're part of this evolution, right? So we do have space where realistically, we can never implement any suggestion because suggestions will just by nature be conflicting, right? But it's giving that space for people to be heard. And a large part of the work that we do is educating people in terms of, well, you're suggesting this, right? The impact of this is X, Y, and Z, right? We don't think that would be the best way forward because of this. However, if we're missing something, let's have a conversation about it, right? It's about, so we do have a suggestions channel in our Discord for people to come and give inputs like that we can engage on, because ultimately you never know. Like I was a community member, so the next person that could have my story is in the community. And by just dismissing those, I became quite faithful and loyal to the protocol and towards doing something with Beethoven because I was always heard. I wasn't ignored. And my next story is in the community currently, and that's why we need to keep fostering that, because we want the protocol to survive into perpetuity. And it must be a place where anyone can come in for any amount of time, add value, and then if there's a change in their circumstance, they need to move on, then they can, and the protocol can still continue.
Yeah, that's really cool. I was just gonna kind of ask as well. You mentioned earlier that DAOs are still very exploratory and there's no real set model. Is there something about the DAO that you've set out and the structure that it is that I guess is a bit new or a bit different than something we're already familiar with?
Well, I try to that's misspeaking. I had a few people that helped me contribute significantly to that, members of the community, and together we try to put together some familiarity that you see in the corporate world, right? So I studied and I spent a lot of time working in South Africa, and South Africa has a very good corporate governance code, right? And they have a very advanced Companies Act, and I try to take things out of that and implement into ours. One of those things are like on certain key, like a committee that does a lot of you could say they have a lot of decision-making power or authority within the protocol, should never have more team members in it than the community, right? And that leans into things like executive and non-executive directors that you see in companies, so that you have that balance, and it's structured around what good corporate governance looks like in the corporate space. Now, you can't do all of that in the digital asset space, because most of the regulators don't know what they want to do with digital assets regulation themselves. So it was kind of just, we think this could be this could be like a very good thing, and it could move us in the right direction. and then engage with everyone. What did you think about it? Like looking at your thoughts on DAO governance as a whole. Like, do you have any thoughts on what direction it might go into?
Yeah, I think how you said it fairly well. Like there's going to have to be some sort of delegation. I think the biggest hurdle is apathy. People just don't want to vote. People, they either forget about it and they just kind of buy into a token and then they just maybe stake it and then move on. And the other guys maybe just aren't that aware. Maybe it's hard to always be updated. So I found that voter apathy is probably the next biggest hurdle for governance. And that's excluding regulatory input, but that's so unclear. We don't really know where the regulators will take this, so you can't really plan for it effectively as much as you would like to. So I think the biggest thing that we can focus on now is voter apathy, and it's hard to come up with measures that don't seem authoritative. They don't come across as like, oh, you must vote, otherwise you won't get rewards, or it's hard to strike a balance between those two. But it's an interesting space, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would love to hear actually more about your guys' approach as well too, because you guys, I mean, we have a community, but you guys have a massive community, and you also have us who are part of your community. And how do you actually divide your time between end user, protocol? I imagine it's quite a challenge for you guys to juggle.
Well, I guess that's two separate things, right? You have the governance for the network proposals. So, we might spend, quite some time researching different pathways for a specific governance proposal. Like the recent one we just did for staking rewards, is something that we looked into and like, look, we need more runways so that we can take into consideration more macro, like economic crypto sentiment and ideas that come through that may, help us in the future, and B, just give us more runway so that we can take into more community feedback, upgrades from the Fantom virtual machine. Or actually, that's a whole nother side note that we should probably chat about a little bit. But focusing on more the proposal side, it's just about finding things that need to be fixed, basically, and finding things that are strategic importance for Fantom as a whole, and then putting them forward to the community and saying, hey, this needs to be addressed. What are your thoughts on these few avenues? And yeah, such as the staking rewards, we put forth different timeframes with different percentages to make the runways different. Like I think it went down to like 4% in line with ETH up to 6%. And the community chose 6, so that's something that will be implemented, and it's good to see that the community engaged at the level it did. The quorum was reached fairly quickly, considering some of the other proposals never reached quorum. So that was pretty cool to see.
One of the things that I think is also it's kind of like a tricky problem to solve, and that goes for whether that's a foundation, layer 1 foundation, or any protocol building on it, is again back to this sort of distinction between mercenary and missionary, right? Where you may have a vote, and the options may favor kind of two different roads, right? The fork in the road being, on one hand, you have maybe there's, for example, an option to keep things as they are in a way that's unsustainable, but that's going to favor kind of more mercenary-oriented token holders who have high time preferences, right? Meaning that they are okay with essentially draining the lake to drink the water now, when you really need that water to then like irrigate the fields, to give it sort of a metaphor, right, in the future. And then on the other hand, you have kind of an option that favors these missionary low time preference type token holders, where they're okay with not drinking all the water in the lake today if that means that we can water the fields tomorrow. And what's really complicated there, and I think this is something that's going to evolve with tokenomics, and I'm sure there's protocols working on it right now as we're speaking, since everything moves so quickly in crypto, is understanding how are your tokens distributed, and in the way that they're distributed, how much of that supply is in the hands of mercenaries versus missionaries, right? Because that can really impact the outcome of a governance proposal that could really dictate the future of a protocol or of a chain. And so I think that's one of those problems that everybody's thinking about and trying to understand how to go about, because you have to give people options for everything. At the end of the day, if you want to decentralize, you have to give the choice, even if the choice is a choice that is, and that could be a net negative in the long run. But a beneficial choice for those who are just planning a quick exit with like a get rich quick type approach. So that's what I think one of the difficulties that everybody's trying to figure out. I'm sure it's something you guys have thought about as well when rolling out changes and such. But I don't know if you have anything to say on that note, Sam, before maybe you touch on the VM, which I know you mentioned.
Oh no, I mean that's for a whole nother discussion. You need Mike to come on and just lay it out. I mean, he made some pretty cool announcements about its testing capacity recently. But
yeah, we'd love to hear more about that later on. But I can totally relate with you, Juan, as well too. This idea that just kind of short-term players. I'm not sure if you guys have been watching. So the BAL Wars, like Balancer just implemented kind of the curve tokenomics, and essentially one whale has locked enough tokens up front and was creating very strong negative pressure by essentially voting all emissions towards a kind of non-productive pool. And it forced them to really take kind of countermeasures on a governance level. And it's been quite an interesting experiment and also experience where the systems can actually turn against you. And this system has turned against them. It's also had knock-on effect against us on optimism because we had actually been relying on those emissions, but are now being the bribe model has failed us there as well too. So we are now getting creative on that front as well too, but can definitely relate on that, man.
Go ahead, Sam. We always end up doing this same question at the same time. Go ahead.
Two questions at once, answer them both. I was just gonna say with that, trying to find different yields in this low compressed yield environment. I'd love to hear some of the ideas that you are running to increase those yields. I know wrapping Yearn tokens was a really cool idea, and Yearn USDC. That pool was great. I'm in there with you. But just some of the ideas that you're doing that are, I guess, alternative to boost those APYs.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, the kind of like version 2 of boosted pools have just recently launched last week on Optimism. So we kind of used Optimism as a testing ground because our liquidity there is not very deep. So it's kind of a green field, so that we could very easily concentrate our liquidity into this construct. And if you guys have a look over there, so essentially what we've done is we've really leaned into this idea that we want our future to be interest bearing or be yield bearing. So our current first iteration setup is that we're leveraging Aave. One takeaway that we did have with the Yearn wrapped versions is that a Yearn token, a vault token, is a multi-strat underneath it. And that actually exposes you to quite a lot of counterparty risk because Yearn, while is highly competent and highly capable, it just takes one of those underlying protocols to have an issue, even post-audit from them, and a lot of that money can disappear. And that's something that we didn't have directly, but had an opportunity for that could have happened, essentially. And that really checked us and checked me personally to say, okay, how do we make sure that these things are actually sustainable and incredibly safe? Because, in the same way that we say, your portfolio should be in such a way that you can sleep at night, for me as well, too, I treat our deployments as part of my personal responsibility and our team's personal responsibility. And if we put users' funds at risk, it is decentralized finance, but I take it very, very seriously about the kind of counterparty risk that we expose people to. So kind of to circle back on that is that we've now essentially in our rollout of V2 of the boosted pools have decided that we're going to leverage just Aave. So we have a Reaper, which is doing a single asset wrapper. So it's just Reaper doing just compounding essentially of the OP rewards on Aave. So there's essentially 2 layers there that can never change. And that is where we've now moved our stable pool to. So our kind of steady Beets boosted, which we have on Fantom, is similar on Optimism, but with this kind of different construct. Outside of that, we have our ETH and wrap staked ETH, Lido's wrap staked ETH. And also the kind of parallel to that is Stater's Fantom X on Fantom, which I think are very cool opportunities for us to lean into as well. And the technological advancement that happened on Balancer or in this next iteration is that they allow for is a protocol yield fee. So very much like a protocol collects a fee on the swap, now we can actually collect a fee on the growth of the yield. And this means that the deeper that liquidity is, the more revenue the protocol can essentially generate off of this liquidity, which actually flips the game, so that we actually don't have to rely just on volume and swap fees, but this creates another avenue for revenue and can create this kind of incentive wheel where we can leverage the fees that we're generating from the yield, feed those back in as incentive to the pool, and continue to create depth of liquidity. That the kind of, I like to say positive outcome, but this kind of flywheel effect that is quite popular at the moment.
The name,
and,
I was going to say the name Lock Stacked and Two Smoking Phantoms is pretty good.
I love it too. We have
Who
one
comes up with
my
the
life.
names?
It's collectively. Souvlaki is actually one of the biggest namers amongst us, I would say, though.
The names always crack me up. So one thing I wanted to touch on, since I know it's like a hot topic of conversation, and it's actually been really interesting for us, as I think over the past year, we've moved into more of this multi-chain kind of world where protocols from Fantom are going to, as just like you guys been Optimism, Avalanche, or whatever else it is, and then protocols from those chains are coming to Fantom. It ends up being really interesting for us because as people go elsewhere, we get almost sort of free word of mouth marketing. We end up having more conversations from teams who may, for example, be on Optimism. They see Beethoven. They're like, what's Beethoven? Oh, that's a competent team. Where are they coming from? Fantom. Let's go check out Fantom. And then they had a bit of point on Fantom. So for us, that's been definitely really a way to get the word out about Fantom. But different people have different interpretations of what it means when a team expands their business operations elsewhere, right? Particularly if they're very native to a specific chain, the user and the protocol. So I'm curious how you think about that, and how you see your expansion of other chains ultimately benefiting the original users that you acquired when you set up, deployed, and launched on Fantom.
Yeah, that's a great question, man. Maybe Souvlaki, you can fill in after me. But I mean, at the root of it, I guess, to maybe like answer the first question is that, yeah, we are still Fantom native. And I think that to us as the team and to the community, like, I would say not Fantom first, but Fantom is our home. And it's where we started, and I think that's where we will always be. And I think that the growth of Beethoven to other networks is, for me, it's a net positive on many layers. So us being on Optimism allowed us to, as a brand, create a stronger partnership with Balancer, which I think is very crucial to our long-term success, because unlike things like Uniswap V2, Balancer V2 is very much a work in progress. There's a lot of iteration and a lot of incredibly cool stuff that's coming down the road. So to have that close of a relationship with them in that development process it gives us a massive competitive advantage moving forward. Additionally, on Optimism, our deployment there was made with the upfront statement that we were not going to sacrifice emissions on Optimism, or excuse me, on Fantom for Optimism. So we are trying to find other mechanisms to generate yield on Optimism without diluting token emissions on Fantom. So to kind of like make that as the upfront statement is that we are still very long Fantom. We still see massive potential into the future of it, but we do recognize and respect the fact that for us as a brand and for us as a protocol to gain traction, to remain relevant outside of this phase, we are a DEX and we have to go where volume is. We have to go where liquidity is, and that is one of our strategies in the next kind of period of time as well too.
It's a great explanation. Souvlaki, do you want to add something to that?
Yeah, thanks. I think I'll just we'll talk about actions speak louder than a word, right? And our commitment to Fantom is evident in our decision to adopt Reliquary, which is being built by the Byte Masons as a transition for FBeets, which is our governance token, right? And that new Reliquary setup using FBeets will be deployed on Fantom, and it will only exist on Fantom. And that in terms of, and having our governance still stay on Fantom is as clear a message as we can send, that this is still our home. Or we might go see what the water's like on other networks. That is still our home, and our the rewards that go to FBeets holders will always be distributed on Fantom, and that is, well, when I say always, like, depends if governance changes that, but under the current model, it goes back. And so I don't know, but from the outside, like, what are your thoughts in terms of projects trying to bring that success back to Fantom, like trying to be like, hey, there are world-class teams here on our network, like they were made here. Like, what are I realize I just referred to ourselves as a world-class team. Please. But what are your thoughts on what, like, we're trying to do, especially with White Masons and other teams?
I think I'm picking up what you're putting down. I think with the layer one space, it's kind of it's like whipping a dead horse with, we're just another Ethereum, killer. We have low fees and we're scalable. I think that's one part of it all, but I think we just keep seeing, more and more layer ones coming out with the same, our TPS is 1 million and we're super scalable and whatnot. So I think layer one such as Fantom, we need to look elsewhere at what else can we offer dApps who deploy on Fantom. So one would be security, so increasing the security of the network. We all know that if say if a bridge is hacked within the network, or even like in a completely different vertical like GameFi or an NFT hack happens on that network, it's highly likely that a percentage of your user base would have been some way or another involved with that and therefore affected, and that impacts your growth as a DeFi app, even though the hack happened in an NFT or a GameFi space. So security of the network as a whole is so important. So that's why we partner with DDAO, providing Watchdog, which basically monitors contracts with a TVL of over 10 mil and analyzes the bytecode and it gives alerts if there's any sort of vulnerability detected. So having I guess you could call it a guardian angel is something it's a bit different. It's not just, we're super fast, we're super scalable. Yes, you also get additional security benefits and being involved in building on a safer chain. And then the next part would be building out and that community aspect of it. So we've recently announced a hackathon with Morales, Google Cloud, and the other layer ones there are Binance Smart Chain and Polygon. So it's basically a hackathon based, and the tracks are DeFi based. And doing events like this, it's pretty cool because you get the community involved. People get to compete for prizes, and it kind of brings back the community aspect. So that's the community side, and we're having live events across the world as well, a bit more. So people can join and meet us in person and meet other people building in person. And then another point would just be, providing access to funding. So that's a massive one that everyone, always asks us. And whether it's through our VC partners that we have, or whether it's through the vault when it gets launched, that's hopefully going to happen within this year, and that's taking 10% of all transaction fees of the network and putting them into a vault where the community, again, coming back to governance, can get involved and direct where they want to see those funds going. I think that's really cool. I haven't seen any other network really implement anything like that. I've seen transaction fees go back to developers specifically, but not going to like a network war chest, so to speak. So once that gets going, I think that's going to be really interesting to watch the dynamics play out. So yeah, I think it's just thinking creatively, like how can we help your dApp be better, and just trying to work along those lines.
And Gitcoin, right?
And Gitcoin, thank you, Juan. Of course, that's such a huge one too. So we have Gitcoin as well coming out this month. Heaps more info is about to follow out with that, so that's going to be really fun as well.
What I'll also say about Gitcoin is that I think it really follows a similar model to you guys' approach in decision making, where just like every other protocol and like every other chain, we've learned a lot of things along the way. And one of the things we learned is that incentives need to be distributed in a way where it's sustainable and where, again, it attracts those missionaries and not those mercenaries. I keep going back to this distinction because I think it's a really good way to explain a lot of the things that I've personally learned along the way. And in short, what this is going to ensure is that instead of the bulk of monetary incentives, which if we're looking at token prices today, I think it's in the range of 70 to 80 million USD that's going to be distributed from the foundation via Gitcoin. Instead of the bulk of that going to mercenary short-term actors who want to essentially extract value from the network and, basically for lack of a better way of putting it, burning it, like throwing it in the trash, it's going to be distributed and allocated based on the actual community or network participants voting, right? So it's quadratic funding, meaning that many different votes carry more weight than one single vote by a large whale. And so again, that ensures that the projects that essentially where their work and their communities and their engagement speaks for itself are going to be the ones that receive the bulk of this funding, versus what we saw happening earlier, which was that some good actors may have unfortunately not had access to it any longer because of the sort of loopholes that existed in it. But what was happening before is that you could have these more mercenary, short-term oriented thinkers who figured out a way to extract the bulk of those incentives and direct them in a direction that was not good for the long-term prosperity of the network. So Gitcoin, again, aligns with the sort of bottoms-up approach we're taking in terms of decision-making and distributing it and decentralizing it. And that includes incentives. And I mean, it's another parallel to this burn vault that Sam was describing, where even for smaller, let's say like long tail type projects, they could still get the funding they need. And that's also decided upon via governance through F-Wallet. So those are some of the different approaches we're taking, where the monetary incentives will still be there, but it's going to be done in a very different way from what I think most people have seen elsewhere.
Sorry, Souvlaki, go ahead.
I was just going to say that is so cool. I think, and I have a lot of respect in terms of how you're trying to evolve with things and seeing what doesn't work and changing it. I think when you first did the original incentive programs, like it was quite telling that even then it was different to what other networks were doing. You were giving your incentives specifically to teams and not to users, and I can understand why you did it like that. And I can see that you're constantly looking to evolve to find the best fit where all parties win. And I think that is the overarching narrative of what we're all doing here in this industry, right? We're looking to evolve to find the right solution to problems we never knew existed a year ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think it's exactly telling, like Souvlaki said. And I mean, the distribution mechanism of the original incentive program, while beneficial to us, was top heavy, and that's for sure. So I mean, there was very few winners and unfortunately a lot of losers or non-recipients essentially. And I think that to have this opportunity to reimagine it and revisit it is really cool. And for you guys to have taken that step, while hard, is definitely as kind of like end term goal for the network. I personally think in a positive direction.
The way I like to think about it is like, if somebody were to tell me like, hey, have you seen there's a line all the way down the block at the store at this new restaurant that opened up? And I'm like, oh, really? Is it that good? And it's like, no, it turns out they're giving out free food today. It's like, oh, of course the line's down the block, right? Like people are getting free food. And then the question is, the people who are going there and getting those free things, when the well runs dry, which eventually it will for everybody, nothing is endless in supply without eventually there being a contraction in it and what can be distributed. When that runs dry, are the people who you serviced going to be the people who still stick around, or are they going to be the ones who look for the next place that's giving out free things and then they leave with their entire social circle? And so I really don't think it's that difficult of a distinction to make when we look at incentives programs to see what incentives programs are favoring high time preference mercenaries versus which ones are favoring low time preference missionaries, because the incentives are going to run dry eventually for all of them. And then the question is, when they do, who is going to remain? And I think that's the question everybody should be asking, personally, at least.
The silver lining here is that I did attract some pretty cool projects, and you're right, Souvlaki and Daniel, like, we were thinking of a way, just to have it more metric based. We don't want to have to like try to pick and choose winners based on who we think is better. We want to have some sort of metric that you hit, you get. But yeah, obviously that was changed towards the end. But at least it did attract some pretty cool projects like yourself. So the silver lining is having your Beets native on Fantom was a really big one.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, like the kickstart that you guys gave us, the kind of like attention that Fantom had, our capacity to build a brand in that moment, that is why we're here. That is why we get to do this thing. That's why we get to build and continue building. And for that, I am personally incredibly thankful for everything that you guys have done for us. Just to kind of say that up front. I think that to kind of like move this forward and to continue to build this relationship out and to continue to build with you guys is really just, I find it lucky. I find it lucky to be in this space in this moment, doing these things. Oh.
You were so grateful Souvlaki had to drop off.
Yeah, I couldn't even take it.
he's like, I don't even
care. Well said. Yeah. I mean, I think you nailed it with that. Like at the end of the day, and Sam, of course, correct me here or add anything else that you think I'm missing, but the foundation is fully committed to funding and incentivizing the right kind of projects. The question is rethinking how, right? It's not, there's no need for funding, there's no need for incentives. Of course there are, just like you mentioned, you wouldn't be where you are today without that initial boost of liquidity injected into your team and into your ecosystem. But the question becomes, how can you do this in a sustainable long-term fashion so that we can start thinking 5-10 years down the road and not 3-6 months down the road?
Incentives are like it's like R&D for community and ideas, because blockchain is still very new. People need different ideas, so you consider, I think incentives is almost like R&D for ideas with how to build out DeFi or GameFi or NFTs. It's so it's definitely needed in some capacity, but I think we're all in agreement that it needs to be long term.
100%.
So I don't know if Souvlaki is going to be able to join us, and I don't know if this is a question for him, but as we're getting closer to the end of our session here, I wanted to ask about the general aesthetic of Beethoven. Like, where did this kind of creepy maestro vibe come from, and then how did that evolve into the NFT sort of subculture you have within your community as well?
So I mean, all kind of thanks to our visual aesthetic goes to Mr. V, who is our designer, and just an absolute legend. Mr. V and I have been working together now for, I believe, like 12 years, and I've never seen him more in his element than here. I think there's a massive fit for the kind of special weirdness that he has, and has kind of really made it's like such a big part of who we are. And in terms of like, where does the Beethoven come from? It comes from this, you guys may know of Mr. Kind, but Mr. Kind's kind of narrative is that the idea was that Beethoven had unfinished work before he died, and he's come back from the dead, and he's here to work his ass off until he gets it done. And he's learned a lot in the kind of afterlife, in the underworld, and is trying to take those learnings to maybe equalize, re-level, create a fair environment. And from that, our narrative was born.
I like that. I remember in the early days, you guys did tweet some like songs and like pieces by him. I was like, oh yeah, I'll listen to this, and always put it on, and like helped me do a bit of work, just listening to it.
And if I'm not mistaken, you guys are working with different kinds of crypto-involved musicians and artists, right? Like, if I'm not mistaken, I saw that for one of these optimism promotional campaigns you did, you were working with Stephen Vinyl, if I'm getting the name right.
Exactly. Yeah, this guy's also incredible. Really, essentially did he did it as Beets and Shout, because we have a really kind of Beatles style theme over there. And he had sung it himself. We have a guy who's helping us out with animations, and essentially, it's just a culmination of just incredibly creative, really talented people just like spinning up such cool stuff to represent Beethoven as a brand, and really I think provides us with essentially just something that nobody else has on that execution. The speed at which we can bring it, the quality at which we can bring it, I think really sets us apart from most anybody else that's out there, and it's something really special that I find that we get to bring.
Yeah,
Love it.
That's awesome. And it's pretty cool just to be able to talk to you know, even though you're non, you guys do come across as very personal. So I think it's working pretty well.
Yeah, it's definitely this like I find it to be so fascinating because I come from, I mean, maybe to circle back to the very first question, one is so I'm one of the devs for Beethoven. For those of you guys who didn't catch that, I have a kind of a master's in computer science and have worked in Web 2 for the bulk of my professional career. And to be in this space is very fascinating to me because it has always been about who you are and where you're from and what school you went to. But here it's none of that. Nobody knows who I am. And it's all about the content that we do, the product that we deliver, us showing up to work every day, us being here, us doing that matters. And that's how you build the trust. And I think that there's something very special about that that I've never experienced before. And to build these bonds anonymously is something that's incredibly interesting and continues to fascinate me and drive me every day.
Yeah, for sure. And just as we wrap up the conversation, it would be good to just know what your next steps are as Beethoven. You know, what should the community look out for, and what can we expect from you?
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of our kind of like immediate next steps is that we're going to roll out the next version of Booster Pools onto Fantom. So I would expect that in the next few weeks, and that's going to be very cool for us to essentially have this opportunity to create a kind of interest-bearing future for Beethoven X on Fantom, which should be a unique value proposition across all of the dexes. Can we create sustainable yield via non-token incentives? In our liquidity pools. And then beyond that, one thing that's coming up in the kind of midterm is managed pools. Sam and I, we've talked about this a little bit, but it's essentially this idea that it's a pool that can have tokens that get added and removed. Weights can shift dramatically. It can have many tokens, so in the upwards of hundreds, or maybe 100. I think it's the max cap is unknown. It can set the swap fee to a 99%, so it essentially can stop trading at any point. So that if you wanted to say sit out of market volatility for a period of time and only rebalance when some threshold has been crossed, then you can then relower swap fees slowly. And it essentially creates this, what is the future kind of programmable liquidity is the tagline, where any smart contract can control this pool in very creative ways. And it's just a matter of how creative are you. One thing that I think is being built right now is this kind of fear and greed index pool. So it kind of flips based on the fear and greed index, the ratios. And that is just, I think, the beginning of what's coming.
Cool. Yeah, I love that
Sounds
idea.
awesome. Yeah, I mean, that way I don't have to think about my own fear and greed. I'll just let the automatic sentiment indicators do it for me.
Right.
I love it. Well, hey, Daniel, thanks so much to you and to Souvlaki for joining us today. This was really an enlightening conversation as to where you're going, what's next, and your perspective on the whole space. So, yeah, that's all I've got for now. So, Sam, anything from you?
No, it's really good talking to Daniel and Souvlaki if you're out there listening now. Yeah, thanks for your time, and I'm looking forward to hopefully doing more together and watching you guys build on Fantom and just grow in general.
Hey guys, thank you so much for the time. It's been a real pleasure. Really enjoyed it.
All right. Thanks so much, Daniel. We'll catch you soon.